Good morning, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us. We're delighted to have Dom on the line. Dom Brooks, who's the Associate Director with Data Labs, which is a sister agency with curated content. The objective for today's session was very much to look at that final level in the crawl, walk, run scenario of content marketing. So Dom will be focusing quite a bit in relation to analytics and ways of taking lots of data and presenting it to you in such a way that you're able to create some pretty slick looking content. So very much looking forward to today's session. Thank you very much, Dom, for being with us. And I'll hand over to Dom. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Hi, thanks for joining us. And thanks for the introduction, Derek. I am, as you said, Dominic from Data Labs. I'm the Associate Director with Data Labs, curated content sister agency and often partner agency. Today, I'll be running you through a reasonably sophisticated look at marketing analytics with focus naturally on content marketing. In that, in a sense, it's a lot to do with our world and our customers' world, and also the partnerships and the similarities we share with curated content and their marketing automation. So without any further ado, I'd like to get started, and also if there's any questions, or please feel free to use the chat section in the bottom left-hand side of the chat window. I'll get to those as they happen, or part of the Q&A session toward the end. So where I want to start today is exposing you to what we call a content marketing analytics ecosystem. So the first slide illustrates our world and our client's world, what we do for a client, and then how we translate that from the content produced and the content distributed into reporting analytics with metrics, and further to that to really really expand upon the data we've collected and to reuse that into creating experiments and testing, and ultimately a level of sophistication that becomes predictive or almost algorithmic. So really simply, content marketing strategy, analytics strategy is a partnership of what you're doing with your content strategy. It goes hand in hand with that, and as I said in the second part just under here, that's the website predominantly. I'll focus mainly on website and search marketing, as that's kind of been the theme, as I understand it, from the last two of these sessions. So this is where we take our clients, and this is kind of where we begin the journey in terms of an analytics strategy with either their internal departments or, say, curated content. They would come up with a content marketing strategy and a distribution strategy, and we'd sort of take it when it comes to the analytics and reporting, and we'd work it through a reporting and a distribution strategy into a tagging strategy. Simply, that could mean through Google Analytics or whatever analytics program you're using. This one may be a Google Tag Manager to get a bit more sophisticated and really get down to sort of micro tagging and micro content. And where Data Labs sort of comes into its own is the second phase under here, which is the reporting and the dashboards. I'll show you quite a few examples of dashboards we use predominantly for marketing and content marketing. There will be a couple as well that are a bit more holistic and have a marketing focus, but also will have a bit more than just the marketing. So they'll be sort of regional and sales based, and in a couple of examples, there'll be offline marketing as well as online. So I'll get to that at the end, but realistically, what we love doing is the dashboards, the reporting of the analytics, and then using that data to both drive content, create content, measure it, experiment on it, and ultimately, and where we're moving and where our clients, our more sophisticated clients that have been with us a little bit are going to move on to is predictive. That's a brief introduction of what I'm going to speak about today. This is what it looks like in its final stage. This is a web marketing e-commerce dashboard. So this is the kind of finished product that we end up with when we've gone through a process. This one is fairly sophisticated. It's one we really like, but I'm going to sort of speak today about various levels of sophistication. A lot of this is new to people, even people with sophisticated digital marketing and inbound marketing and traditional marketing. It's more common, but it's still fairly new. So that sort of brings me to my next one. We talk about data and analytics today. I want to again emphasize that simplicity in our world is really important, and we as an agency and myself today are not going to go on too much about sort of methodology behind data capture and data cleansing. It's not a data science webinar, and nor am I an expert in that. So that often is a sort of sticking point, especially for the people in marketing, that the data is the primary concern. With analysts and operations people and often finance people as well, they're much more comfortable with the data collection, and it's a different conversation. And we often notice with marketers, in any sense, be it inbound or outbound or traditional, the primary concern is data collection and accuracy, and that kind of a lot of the time the marketers come to us to solve those problems, and we impress upon them, as I will to you, that it's not as complicated as it sounds. Ultimately, it's no matter how sophisticated your data collection capture is, you're going to end up probably with a CSV or an Excel spreadsheet or an API feeding whatever marketing or whatever distribution channel that you use. So I guess that would be my first thing to emphasize, is don't worry so much if you're not a data person, if you're not an analyst, then there are ways to simplify it. When we talk about our methodology, we often leave data afterwards. We like to get the sort of methodology and the strategy down first, knowing full well that at some point there is the data to support it. And if there isn't, then that's a problem for another day. So remember, I guess, that CSVs or even Google Sheets, a lot of our clients, as sophisticated as they may be, will still end up using Google Drive. So that would be a first one, I guess, is don't panic when it comes to data, because as this slide emphasizes, there is a lot of it. I'm not going to go into too much detail about all of it. I'll focus a bit on website mainly in terms of search marketing, inbound marketing, as that's my background, and that's kind of what I love the most when it comes to this sort of stuff. But yeah, I guess the point of today's talk is just to give you a broad overview about what our ecosystem looks like, how we use it ourselves, and how we provide that to our clients who, in marketing particularly. I like the idea of futurism. I'm sure you guys know, you have some sense of what you're doing and your own strategy, and how you, after the last couple of talks, how you want to sort of evolve that and develop that. I guess I'd like to show you a bit about how the final steps in terms of reporting and taking that to the next level. But I'd also like to kind of go into a bit of the stuff we love, which is the advanced thinking, and almost futurism. So that's kind of where I'd like to get us today. I'll speak a bit about metrics and a bit about the sort of analytics that I like and that I use in my day-to-day sort of marketing stuff, and the ones that I'll, I guess, get on my soapbox about a little bit when it comes to presenting those to clients. I won't, again, focus too long on that. About 7% of this will be on marketing metrics, but yeah, I guess I preface that by saying that I've an analytics app on my phone, and I'm not opposed to getting it out at parties. So that's a little bit about me. So I think I'll try and tone it down when it comes to the straight analytics talk and give you guys a bit more about methodology. So this one, again, this is just another example about how we approach visual analytics and reporting. This one is more a HR dashboard, but just wanted to give you guys a bit of a highlight of how we visualize data, how we report, and how we work with clients to get them in a position where they can look at this and use this to, drive decisions, to drive strategy, to review strategy, and essentially make their marketing ecosystem more effective and get their staff members more engaged. So the next one as well just gives you a bit of an overview of how we approach dashboard design and analytics as an organization. This is a relational map or a structural map of how we designed a series of dashboards and reporting suites for a hotel chain in Asia Pacific. So you'll see that this translates pretty reasonably well to sort of a base level of operations, and then a wider regional area of operations up here, some comparative stuff and some risk and opportunities, which drives decision making, which drives decisions and drives strategy and allows you to review strategy. So this is kind of part of our methodology. This is, I guess, one we've designed specifically for a client with specific needs, but in terms of overall strategy, this is kind of universal, especially when you look from the top down. That executive summary dashboard is what we sometimes call, I guess, the gateway drug. This client had a reasonable level of sophistication. Their data sources were, pretty well structured. So they did decide to start from the bottom up. But a lot of our clients who are new to it often come in with either an executive summary, because obviously it's coming from the top down. That's the decision making needs to be driven, and they'll come to us at that level, or a general state of the business. This client is different because they had kind of a more holistic overview of it, and they were looking at it as a long-term project. So, but this again just drives our methodology, and this works from any sort of marketing or sales and operations point of view, whether it's regional or local or national or web only, or a hybrid version of that. So, as I said, this is risk and opportunity. The region and the executive summary are a really big sort of driver of interest and excitement. So that's my introduction. Just a little bit about us, Data Labs. We're based in Melbourne. We're a data visualization and analytics agency. I often put a visual analytics right about here because by and large everything we do, and I guess our point of differentiation is that we are visual. We have, in the time we've been around, I think provided one spreadsheet as a finished product, and we were not particularly happy about it, but we much prefer that level of reporting than we do handing over spreadsheets or Word documents. So in terms of who we work with, this is just a bit of a rundown of the clients and the type of clients we get. As I said, we're often coming across marketing teams because there's a real need to sort of have multi-channel data sources in the one place and get understood and get simplified and get on a single page, so it's just the meetings run in that sort of Kanban style, and then everything's in the one place. Because the marketing guys, as you guys may well know, are more likely to have different agencies for SEO or social media marketing or inbound marketing or content creation. So it's a coming together of different types of data sources. So as you said, there's a reasonable emphasis on business dashboards as they're the sort of analytics reporting tools that we find that people are really sort of getting involved and getting excited about because it's relatively new. There's been dashboards around, and a lot of software have them, but it's only recently that we've been able to customize and then launch them back into whatever software that you are using, which is getting people really excited, and especially if you can get a really good level of data visualization techniques. You can make some really good decisions really quickly because you've got everything in this a logical and enjoyable format. A big part of what we're brought in to do in terms of analytics and especially marketing is simplify. We are asked to simplify because usually it's the first time all reports have been brought together, especially in a digital format. So that's predominantly where we come in from a marketing point of view, and that's the sort of, as I mentioned earlier, like the early gateway drug as such, the early level of sophistication that we've got multiple sources. Some of them are offline, some of them are manual. I mean, people have got, we had a client that runs workshops in the field and they hand out prospectuses, and that still gets inputted manually. So a lot of the time we're here just to emphasize how this all can be done. It's not particularly difficult to get everything in a singular dashboard. And once you do that, you can start to start here and work your way back to a strategy. Once you know and once you're certain that all your data sources are collated, everyone's quite literally on the same page. Or if you sort of, often if you're sort of, as that relational map I showed you earlier showed, if you're in a sort of sophisticated and advanced level, you can start at this one. But ultimately we come in and we show people that everything can be done on one page. It can be simple. It can be updated in real time or close to real time as soon as the data comes in. And it can be really quickly used to experiment and test and take that level of inbound marketing and especially content, which is the best thing for testing and multivariate testing and stuff, into a sophisticated sort of data analysis program of work, I guess. And at that point, it becomes really exciting that you can do things like automate it and make it algorithmic, make it predictive, and that's where we're going as both internally for our work and our client sort of stuff. So I won't get too bogged down in sort of what the algorithmic and predictive. I just want to emphasize to you guys that, don't be ashamed if you're not there yet. Very few people are. It's that sort of futurism thing I talked about. It's not too far away, and it's not as complicated as it sounds. Next one, just to emphasize, content is data. At the end of the day, we do it for a purpose, and that purpose largely is going to drive data. That data is going to drive decisions. But equally, we as an agency, we feel that data is content as well. Once you've Once you've come up with that, we feel that that data drives content creation, and that might be the result of testing. That might be survey results that are part of your inbound marketing. So yeah, that's I guess where we view our niche. We report on it and we use it to drive and create content. So, like I said, we're brought in to simplify things, and oftentimes this is the sort of stuff that we have to simplify. I'm sure you guys are all familiar with one of these things. We got this one from a bank, and it's national finance data, and it becomes hard looking at this to find answers in this and find a strategy in it. So we say that a lot of the time that data becomes it's noise, and most of that is noise. And we look at it in this sense that, for example, in the web marketing and the inbound marketing environment, here are some examples of stuff that you guys come across, and we predominantly emphasize the clients that come to us with data dumps like that. And that's a big one, but that's not the biggest one we get, is to look at it in the sense of fit its purpose and start to emphasize what it is you guys need. Don't let something like that drive your strategy. Look at it in the sense that there's only a small amount of things that are going to be relevant in it. And once you start to cut away the noise and get rid of most of that data and really drill down into what's important, it becomes a lot easier to organize it, clarify it, and then all of a sudden you can label it and look at it in terms of a sort of system or an environment that's relevant and important. So you can take, competitor and search term and then go that and drive strategy there, or you can take, industry and an idea that's come from data or is driven that from that information and say that's a lot more simple and a lot more effective than sort of endlessly kind of worrying about are we using the data effectively? Are we managing it? So this is where we often sort of try and simplify things for a client. Say, you've got the data repository somewhere, no doubt. It drives a spreadsheet, as we saw previously. Oftentimes there's a PDF report, but at this level, it's the top of the pyramid. It's the peak. It's the insights are found here once you've done the groundwork all the way down here. So, and again, I'd emphasize that to you that everyone we've come across more or less looks exactly the same, and a lot of the sort of aha moments come when we say to them, it's like, don't worry about the data, don't worry about don't sit there and stare at the spreadsheet till your eyes hurt. Take it away and let's come up with a strategy, and let's tell you that this is going to happen eventually. And once you're in that sort of environment, to say, let's build the analytics strategy based on our overall strategy, or to complement and to report on it, it becomes much simpler, much easier, and much more engaging. So a little bit about strategy. I'd imagine I'll be preaching to the choir with this one, but you do need to have a plan. I guess anything in life, it's the notion of what gets measured gets managed. I mentioned earlier that the relationship we have with curated content is kind of nicely summed up in this one. We, on the left-hand side, reporting, visualization, analysis, analytics, is both the sort of the back end, I guess, to the content strategy and the inbound strategy and the distribution, but it also feeds that, and it's symbiotic, as this, I guess, highlights. It's revolving, it's constant, it's iterative, and yeah, it's lovely when these things come together and they work nicely, and you can just measure effectiveness, or you can get sophisticated, like I mentioned earlier, and use it to automate your reporting, or automate your dashboard, or your monthly sales reports, your reports to your board, and that sort of stuff, or you can drive use it to reporting to animation and stuff like that. So you guys will be familiar with this sort of stuff, the nuts and bolts of inbound. I love that sort of stuff. I've been doing that for a number of years, but at the end of the day, as much as I love making engaging content which delights and sort of really helps drive your message, at some point it becomes data, and ultimately that's the aim. There's a purpose in your strategy. It's to, whether it be to sell or to make aware or to get branding, some point it becomes data, and at some point you come to someone like us to really solidify your reporting and your presentations and how that happens, so, or what you do with that data. And that's, as I said, the data is content. We get back to this level and we take that data and take those strategies and use them to form sophisticated reporting. Broadly speaking, I guess most people are familiar with infographics. those dashboards I mentioned, those analytic strategies are often probably termed infographic reports or infographic dashboards. That's an okay way to sort of view that as a sort of broad overlay, and that's where we look at it, is that data, again, forms content. So ultimately, what it looks like, this is the dream, I guess, the simplification, and it's so simple you've still got an iPhone 4. What we do and what we try and emphasise against people is that this is not very far away. In fact, the basics of the reporting is there. It's not particularly difficult, no matter how sort of unsophisticated your data repositories are. At some point, it's going to be there. At some point, that people like us, apart from designing the visuals and designing the methodology and reporting and analytics for your campaigns, obviously we're pretty au fait with how to wrangle that data into here. And once the penny drops and once everyone's on board with this sort of methodology and this sort of look and feel, then it becomes, I think, a beauty almost, and it really does help optimize operations and sales and especially marketing, as marketing tends to be sort of broadly aligned with probably where various other departments, and they're probably the most connected with different parts of the business. It really does sort of, I guess, the most visible in that sense. Having tools like this that are accessible, updatable, trusted, they look fantastic. I mean, it's not discount that, and they do a job, and they drive decision making, and the speed to insight is much quicker than it is with spreadsheets or with reports, and especially if you've got analysts sitting there making them day after day. So, and this is the overlay in a nutshell. That's what it is. As I said, it's not once the infrastructure is set up and once the thinking's there, it's not particularly complicated. There's, in a sense, 3 sets. That could be your data repository here, that could be a Google Drive spreadsheet, and at the end, that's your reporting, and that's done, and that sort of stays there, and doesn't need to be reproduced, or it doesn't need to be updated every day. You don't need an analyst sitting there reporting on it, and a lot of the time, that's kind of the first problem people present to us, is that they've got resources sitting there, and BAs and analysts sitting there constantly churning out reports that they then need to re-ingest, and at the end of the month they've got about a day's worth of time to come up with a sort of strategy and understand it, and most of the time it's creating reports and like reading the rest of the organisation's one. And I guess as marketers, the sort of, and especially in digital and inbound, the speed at which you need to operate and the speed and the sort of almost the fickleness of those channels, you just don't have sort of months and weeks to deal with that stuff, especially when those sort of seasonal peaks and troughs occur. It's not feasible. So you need to get to a level like this one. This is one sort of a hybridized one that we use. As I said, my primary love, I guess, is SEO and search marketing. So this one is kind of one we've made for ourselves, but this is kind of almost becoming, in its sort of second iteration, almost a branded SEO dashboard. It's not quite perfect yet. There's a little bit of probably this one in itself is not quite there, but you get a good understanding of inbound marketing or an SEO search marketing, an understanding really quickly of your overalls, your opportunities through to revenue in the pipeline. This is where we're at. Again, sort of not even, as I said, it's not as sophisticated as anything sort of predictive yet, but it is, like I said, it's a great way to get everything on that one simple Kanban style, one sheet, take one sheet to your meeting or one dashboard to your meeting. So now just into sort of distribution, which is, I guess, where you guys are probably most comfortable with as marketers. You know, your content distribution channel is kind of the nuts and bolts of what you do. So again, reiterating my point that content is data. For our purposes today, I'll focus on the ones I'm most comfortable with. In terms of distribution strategies, you guys should be reasonably au fait with this sort of stuff. We look at this in terms of strategy as, again, what we do internally and what we do with our clients. We build, and again, what curated content do is build sort of channels and distribution channels that are sort of are designed to sort of scale and to be tested and to drive that content to start the flow of data, and as it becomes more sort of sophisticated and more involved, as you can branch out into different sub-campaigns, that content drives data straight back in, and then you can use it to form the basis of your hypotheses, your predictions, and your sort of circular marketing ecosystem that sort of, as you push things out, it separates into an A, B, or a C test, and it comes back in with well tagged, well understood. You see what works, what doesn't. You split again, and you become and you get a result page like this. Now, this is I guess a fairly large digital marketing agency. It's a campaign, landing page, traffic, results. This one, there's offline as well as online. That was a sort of sticking point for them, because they're almost sort of embarrassed to say that we're still uploading stuff via a spreadsheet. And so to them, that's it's fine. Not all problems can be solved by automation or that sort of thing. There's still real world engagement, as I guess probably emphasized by maybe public relations or events. Those aren't web events, they're physical events that people attended. But I guess what's important here is to look at this and these channels of a content-driven search campaign with outreach and that sort of reasonably interesting and holistic sort of campaign here that's driving results like this. So yeah, I guess I just wanted to draw your attention to the nature of how this dashboard's constructed. You can see that there are positives and negatives. I'll get into a little bit about traffic. For a campaign page, singular campaigns, traffic's not too bad. It's important. I think it's one of those sort of metrics that sort of often gets relied upon, and I believe if you sort of were paying attention to those last few dashboards, I showed you most of them start with traffic. That's not necessarily always best practice. It's important, but in terms of sophistication levels, if your campaigns don't have traffic or your website doesn't have traffic, that's a problem in and of itself. Whether or not you need to continually tell people how much traffic, or if you are getting it, and if page views are driven by unique users, I think at that point you kind of look beyond like what's that telling us. So I'll get to that in a little bit, but ultimately this is a pretty good bringing together of an analytics campaign. And I chose this one specifically because it's not a website, it's not overall, it slots in to a specific sort of campaign need. It's in its design, it had a number of people come to it with different inputs and needs. So I mean, this wasn't a single user or a single persona, maybe to borrow that expression. We often when we design analytics scenarios or situations, we'll use similar to a marketing persona to use that to focus, say, the same way for marketing, you'd say a CEO or a general manager or a sales manager or a marketing manager or a brand manager. We use those personalities or personas to define what it is how we design and how we design too. So you'll notice that in this one, and maybe say here, that there are sort of not competing interests, but more than one sort of interest. And that's kind of, a lot of the time, that's part of what we do, and that's the first sort of conundrum we come across, is that as much as everyone knows that they need to both measure, track, understand, simplify, and report quickly and clearly because people lack time, there are multiple influences getting to that point. There are interest groups. There are people that care more about search engine optimization, for example, than they do about internal communications or even sort of ROI, for example. And that becomes, I guess, the first problem, and that's the first problem we're often presented with, is that everyone is competing. Everyone needs to get their reporting done. And as I mentioned earlier, there's that sort of gateway drug, that overall sort of top-level campaign is where we often become, I guess, the sort of stepping stone into a sophisticated level of reporting. So yeah, this one, again, there are positives and negatives. You guys are more than welcome to sort of hit me up afterwards, and I can go through. I don't want to sort of deconstruct all the dashboards we've got here. I'm more than willing to do that over email or a chat afterwards, so happy to sort of both advise and field any questions. So let me know if you do want to do that. Just back to that one, I said that we often come in, no matter, like, that one was designed for Accenture, and it's like quite sophisticated, and they're obviously pretty massive, but they're still at the point where it's the bringing together of reports, because things change. As you guys are aware, things change quickly. 2 years ago, no one was reporting on Snapchat. Probably 3 or 4 years ago, no one had a sophisticated Facebook reporting interface, and that sort of stuff comes. 2 years is a long time, I guess, but when you have a pre-existing infrastructure and you're trying to slot in new technologies, new reports, you maybe are changing analytics, or you're changing strategy, or you're changing websites at the same time, it does become really quite complicated. And a lot of the time these things are siloed. I mean, social media from sort of events and public relations they exist in their own world, and even though they're broadly under the marketing, no one at any point has ever sort of started to bring the data that those guys have been sitting on or have into the one place. And as I said, the level of sophistication starts there, and only at that point, when you kind of see it on the one page, can you go to you can go to someone like us and say, okay, what's next? Like, how does this, I get that this is either the current state or the past state. What about future state? What do I do next year that make this better? What does the data tell me is likely to happen? And how do I form hypotheses based on that? So, yeah, as I said, that theme again, that sort of, when I say levels of sophistication, it's not the desire there. It's simply that at some point there's got to be the ground level infrastructure, and everything needs to normalize and rationalize across both technologies, internal and external, and people. So yeah, that's where we're at in that sense. We love coming in at that point. It's a lot of the time, it's the very first time anyone's ever seen all their data in one area, and especially in the visual report that isn't sort of pie charts in Excel. So a little bit on channels in terms of sort of back to the sort of that crossover between content and distribution in terms of, I guess, what's above sea level and under sea level. And I've always used this for both clients and to explain it and say that there's so much that isn't visible. And in this particular example, that sort of level of sort of under the hood, outside of Google and outside of a search query, there's so much data that has been driven by such small actions. And I think I mentioned it just briefly, fickle actions. This, for example, is the percentage of total click-throughs by position and search. So for each position one, you can maybe expect to get 40%, just over 40% click-through rate. That's changed now. That's probably down to about here based on the fact that there's been changes to the Google's search engine results page. But it just emphasizes like how much more there is to online marketing and analytics that isn't driven by the visible stuff that you see when you are looking, searching and behaving on Google and measuring behavior from sort of search engines and Google to websites. And the same with social media, for example. This one is just indicative of how quick things happen and how quick things change. So if you see, and that's in minutes, and that's impressions and likes, and the same thing applies in click-through rate. If you're not sort of viewing your sort of reporting as a live and a real-time thing that sort of like constantly needs to be driving data and driving a data repository like a dashboard or back into your automation software, then you kind of you're constantly in danger of missing out. I mean, there's not much going on around here. I mean, you need a certain level of sophistication to match the market, I guess. So, and that just brings me on to this one that I love. This is driven by data, and this is flat, but there's no reason at all that software like Eloqua or your HubSpot or even the sort of the buffers of the world that deal with social media traffic could drive this and have that move and have that change. And at some point you to, right here is exactly where, or actually for this one, based on last week's data, it's here. Ignore that one because there's too much noise from competitors. And I guess that level of sophistication needs to occur at some point. So I just want to sort of, as we're sort of nearing the end, I just kind of wanted to show you this one. And this is that one. This is the very first time everything came together. And this is coming together of Google data, agency data, again, anonymized. This is a university data, but this is the very first time that all these people have come together as a single sort of entity of reporting, and it was challenging to get there. It was really difficult to get them to understand that the data exists. Don't worry about the visualizations or the strategy. the data will be there to support these. And again, if it isn't, you know about it right now before we started designing and visualizing. So yeah, I guess these guys had struggled with data as they were pure marketing. They didn't have any analysts. They had a Google Analytics guy, but they struggled to get that understanding. But they also had some fairly sophisticated views of how that marketing ecosystem worked, and they were very big on the customer journey map. And this is, again, ignore the language, it's in German, the best example I could find with Post-it notes, but they had a really good idea of using data to drive that level of engagement that is a customer journey and a customer experience, and they wanted to use that to understand how people behaved within their ecosystem. So whilst they were so panicked about getting the data and making sure it was clean and it was worked and it was accurate, which of course it was because it's coming from analytics and they're tagged correctly, and that their outsourced people had their the same level of sophistication. But when the next level for those guys will be something like understanding that customer journey beyond a click and beyond a metric and beyond data into sort of humanizing it. And this is why I quite love these maps, because they really do sort of refocus away from, as I mentioned earlier, the data and the content into what a customer is and what they're doing and how to target individual customers, and then how to design sophisticated data analytics reporting and how to use that to drive campaigns and content. And in real time, but focusing on individuals or individual data sets, I guess. That sort of that market of one idea. So we're my clock tells me we're getting to the Q&A time. So I just wanted to give you guys a bit more of show you a little bit of a case study that's sort of one we did for Nestle, and show you a little bit about methodology in terms of really quickly just give you an idea of how we approach the sessions and the design sessions. That, for example, these are charts that we predominantly use for reporting, especially in marketing. And what we ended up with in this case, due in part to the constraints of their interface, which most don't have a lot of the time. Like these days, you can do a lot of marketing interfaces and automation interfaces, and CRMs even have the ability to get in there and get really sophisticated with what we can add to or even remotely host. But the coming together, I guess, is from this one I showed you earlier into these couple of examples. This one is fairly sophisticated. It gives you a good idea of not just what is, that they had a level of sophistication in that they sell hotel rooms, and once they're gone, they can't use that stock anymore. Once the day's passed, which is kind of emphasized by this, that they're gone. So they've got a view to the future, and they need to constantly understand their current state, past state, but use it to drive information on the future state. And this is one we really quite liked, and we enjoyed designing it, just because there was that extra level of sort of importance based on the future state, and not just a sort of culmination of reports. And just to finish with, this is one that sort of overall, it's for an AFL team, that sort of is their overall snapshot. It includes, I guess, as I mentioned earlier, that notion of marketing sort of comes into everything. A lot of these are financials because it's a CFO dashboard, but that's predominantly driven by, as much as it is maybe the exception of sort of the football. Sorry, it wasn't a very good circle, but the football operations down here, marketing has a sort of a place to play and input in all of these. And I guess this one, again, this one is fairly complicated, and I wouldn't expect you guys to sort of get down to the nitty-gritty and have a look at all those things, but it does show that all-in-one sort of report is quite an exciting thing and quite a sophisticated thing, because like this, at the next level, this drives decisions. And for example, just really quickly before I finish off, we're going likely to use this to sort of overlay form data, say how the team's performing, and weather data. And that'll be, say, able to predict and influence the price of tickets. And at that point, you can possibly discount more, change the price, change packages based on the fact that the team's performing terribly and it's going to rain all Saturday afternoon. You probably don't want to approach it in the same way as you would a grand final rematch on a Friday night 2 weeks before the final starts. So that's kind of where we're at. I change, I think, that futurism sort of stuff, and that's not complicated. That's just data that comes from the Bureau of Meteorology. So these things are, I say futurism and the next level, but those things are not too far away, and it's just a matter of sort of getting the first steps, getting the building blocks of a campaign, and getting that down, and then I guess the sky's the limit, really. So that probably leads me to my Q&A session. Like I said, guys, if you've got anything else or you want more details, you'd like me to explain anything in more detail, please don't hesitate to do so. You can get to me offline if you want a more in-depth answer. But if you guys do have any questions, please feel free to throw them at me.
Thanks, Dom. We appreciate you walking us through that. There's one question here in relation to content so what we've seen a lot of here is content to help the marketer really get some insight into their business and look at taking that information and turning that into a strategy. And a lot of that would be live, although you said there's still some people providing CSV files, etc. That's fine. What if we have a couple of examples of people who have white papers, they've done research, etc. What they'd really like to do then is to be able to take that content and turn it into a really nice visual in place of just simply a white paper that's maybe full of text with a nice little Excel graph or something that's being produced. Is that something that you guys are able to help with?
Yeah. Look, we love those ones. We love sort of cross-purposing, that sort of stuff. The animation we do a lot of the times is based on reusable and rescalable information. So generally speaking, we've got like 3 reporting products that we use either as for marketers or reporting, and sometimes for both, in animation, presentation, and infographic. And those can all be sort of cross-purposed. Those slides, it can be animated. They can be used as a sort of flat infographic in a white paper or as the white paper, but then really quickly and really effectively they become a 30-second or a 60-second animation that can either go on a social media channel or get sent up to a boardroom level. And those in particular, those sort of multi-level or multi-faceted, I guess, reports beyond the sort of text-based white paper are hugely popular because everyone's time poor. And you've got to it stands out when you instead of doing a presentation like this, if you do animate it with the same slide, like we can take all those slides and animate them into, we can make a white paper out of it, we can make an animation out of it. So yeah, that's definitely something we do.
And so then that brings another question here in relation to video content. So what do you see as some of as a percentage, I suppose, of what you produce as a business? Are marketers chasing you to help them produce animated videos to represent data versus, say, an online portal where they can come to a website which is constantly fed with data? Is there which one's taking up the most part of your business?
At this point, usually it's the portal first, but that's generally speaking because people are less aware that it's the same data that feeds the portal that feeds the video, and in the same context. That API or that spreadsheet, it goes, it can go into a graph just as well, a line or a bar or a pie graph, just as it can into an animation. I don't have any examples here today, but again, I can show you, if anyone's interested, I can show you how that works. And it's quite lovely to see how you can use exactly that same data on a sort of scalable and repeatable, say, monthly report, especially, for example, social media companies come to us a fair bit about this. They love that idea. Instead of sending a text report, it's more in line with the kind of nature of, say, Instagram marketing or Snapchat or Pinterest or whatever it is, to have a video that goes for 30 seconds and has the company branding, and it has, here's the impressions, here's the likes, here's the ROI, here's the plan for next month. And that's just as, at some point that data can just feed a video just as simply as it can a dashboard or an infographic.
Perfect. Well, look, we'll be sharing a range of communications with everybody that's attended these 3 sessions over the last 3 weeks, and we'll provide some links there so you can have a look at some examples of how data can be taken from that very ugly spreadsheet you showed us a few moments ago and turn it into a beautiful video or animation, etc. And we'll share a range of assets just to give people some examples of what's possible, because it seems the sky's the limit to a degree, which is great news.
Yeah, Yep, there's amazing things that can be done that, we're always happy to chat about that. So,
Thank
feel
you,
free
Dom.
to send anything through. Not a problem.
Well, look, no more, unless there's any more questions from the group, we'll call it a day. Dom, thank you so much for joining us today. We appreciate your insight, and some of those visuals really are quite striking. Thanks again for joining us on this series, and have a great day, everybody. Thank you again.